Kelly, darling, are you ready? Are you ready to do your part? Are you?
Ah,
There he is. He's ready to do his part. Oh,
hi.
having a yawn because he's just woken up. Um, right. We're introducing our show. Are you ready to start? Are you ready to start? Okay. All right. We're ready to go. Um, so are you going to sit up for this bit? Um, Hello and welcome to Pet Talk with me, Anna, and what's your name? Teddy. Fabulous. That's wonderful. Thank you. You think you're done now? Shall I introduce our guest now, or would you like to introduce her? Okay, I'll do it then. So, we would like to welcome back our wonderful guest today, who is, of course, Rachel Jackson. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Anna. Hi, Teddy. That was a lovely introduction there, young man.
He had just woken up, so he had to stir himself for the occasion. So there he is again.
Oh,
And it is a welcome back because the last time you were here, we were talking about massage and a number of other wonderful therapeutic interventions that you are involved with at Well Balanced Animals. And well, the time went on, and we thought there's so much yet to cover. So here you are again, most generously. And I thought that today we would talk about um, how how it happens that dogs can injure themselves. So, what are the types of activities that can lead to injury, and is there anything we can do to help our dogs to avoid this?
that is such a big question and such a good one, actually. Um, yes, there are all sorts of things that our dogs can do to injure themselves. They're very similar to us in that we can be walking down the road and just go over on our ankle and sprain our ankles. So can our dogs. They don't sprain their ankles, but they do something equivalent. Um, sometimes sports, they can get sports injuries, sometimes a little bit like a repetitive strain injury. So if they're doing something repeatedly, it puts more strain on a certain part of their body. Their conformation will have some part of that as well. So a dog's conformation can affect, for example, some breeds are quite straight-legged, the hind legs. That affects the angle of all the joints, which can then affect the movement through the joints and sort of the all the mechanics within the joints as well. You've also got the puppies whose skeletal system or the connective tissues aren't mature. It's really easy for them to do some either micro or macro damage just by doing something that is just, and we'd class it as an accident. But there are also things that we can do to help avoid those kinds of accidents because once there is joint damage, there will also later be arthritis within that joint, even if they don't have it anywhere else. So, for example, lots of people in the UK now have laminate or vinyl flooring or wooden floors. And I'm sure, like me, you've seen lots of videos on social media of the dogs and they're really moving their paws, but they're not going anywhere because that flooring is so slippery. Now, that's bad enough for an adult dog that is in good health because they could just slip on it, particularly if they're the kind of dog that hears someone at the front door and they go charging up to go, whoa, 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 because they're thinking more about who's at the door rather than what they're doing with the body. But particularly for puppies and dogs with chronic health issues and also senior dogs, it's even harder for them. So, although lots of people have laminate flooring, one of the first things I often end up saying to my physiotherapy clients and some of my T-touch clients is you need rugs. They need to feel secure on these surfaces because um, I suppose you could liken it to us walking around on ice virtually all the time. It creates tension in the body. If you see a person walking on ice, they take shorter strides, they're not as confident, there's more tension in the body. This is similar to what happens with dogs. They may refuse to go into a certain room in the house because it's got a different type of flooring. And sometimes we don't recognize that these behavioral changes are linked to those physical changes for them. And, it might be an indication of pain or that lack of feeling safe. So, for example, in our house, through our breakfast room and kitchen, we've got tiles, and they're not shiny, slippery tiles, that they're quite textured. But even so, we've got a tripod greyhound. So we've got runners all the way through. We've got a pathway all the way through so that she can get to the back door safely, but also make it wide enough that they can turn around on it. And that's quite often what's forgotten because just one leg going off can lead to a slide out. They can damage the joints, they can damage they get soft tissue injury like muscles. Even if they don't get that, it can create other connective tissue damage as well. So for any dog, one thing I would say is they would love you to have rugs on the floor because it just means that they're more secure. And that is one of those changes that it might not be what we had plans when we got our beautiful wooden and laminate flooring, thinking this will be so easy to clean. We've got dogs, it's easy to vacuum and mop, etc. But actually, you can get some rugs that are easy enough to wash or hose down or whatever. You can go as wild about it as you want. There's one make called Ruggable, which actually has a removable backing. So the underneath is your non-slip bit. The top part will actually go in the washing machine if it's not one of the massive rugs, and then you put it back together again. But those are more expensive. But for the middle of a room, if you've got an open plan room, it can be a perfect answer for that middle section of the room as well. So there's lots of little things that we can do. What you want is for them to feel safe and secure and not be overly challenged. So that's kind of the key there to make sure that they are, comfortable and also fit enough to do what we ask them to do.
It's interesting because we do have laminate floor in the living room. It doesn't matter so much because all Teddy does in this particular room is lays about and relax. So he has his bed, he has the sofa, he has the chairs. But one thing that from the earliest days I always made sure is that his bed is right against the sofa so that he can jump onto it rather than onto the hard floor when he
Yes.
jumps off the sofa. And we do the same thing in the bedroom. He's got his bed, but he can jump on ours and off, and we just don't want him jumping onto a hard floor because, I mean, if we're running on hard floors, the impact is quite hard for us.
Yes.
And and it's no different for them. It's a hard floor. So it's very difficult, for us to get that sense of feeling that we're not secure on these floors compared to them. And yet we know that high impact is not so good as well because they're just hard. They're really hard. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would guess that stairs are the other issue.
Yes. And obviously, you've also got to bear in mind the size of the breed and sort of the age of the breed that they mature. Because if you've got a smaller dog, then they're physically mature at a younger age. But then if a smaller dog is, for example, jumping on the settee or going upstairs, proportionally, that is a much larger jump than it would be for a larger dog. So actually, physically, it's thinking about what is best for each of those breeds. Stairs going up and down. One thing that we know about puppies as well is they haven't got that great body awareness. So you've got that proprioceptive system, which is the body awareness, how high to lift legs, to step over things. I mean, a puppy can walk in the middle of a room, there's nothing there and it falls over. They haven't got that awareness of what they're doing with the body. So actually, we don't want to overly challenge them physically while their proprioceptive system is still maturing. And you can see it in how they move. Having them walking, one thing that we do in T-Touch is walking on different surfaces, which gives the underneath of the paws lots of different information. It sends the nervous system different messages so that they've got more of an idea of where their feet are and what they're doing with them. So it's useful to have them walking on different safe surfaces that they can get that sensory information. But we can also do that by walking them in different places. So our walks, should be not so that they're over tiring the dog. They should be shorter walks, but maybe take them to a wood area one day once they're old enough to go out, obviously, so that the texture underneath the feet is quite different when they maybe go to the beach or when they're walking on like a muddy type path or like bark or mulch that you often see on park paths, just to absorb some of that mud. So actually encouraging them to move safely and freely in those more natural environments is more natural for their progression than having them going up and down stairs. And we tend to think it's okay for bigger dogs to do it, but actually if they're still young, it's still quite challenging for them. So I have a borzoi who is 15 months now. She did not go up and down the stairs. I worked on her having that body awareness in different ways. I lifted her into our car because this is the other things. Cars can really vary in height. And, some of the SUVs can be really high. And if you've got a small dog, that is asking them to do a really big leap from a very, from a standing position. They've got to get the body awareness. If they're going into the boot, they've got to be able to stop quickly once they've jumped in so that they don't hit the back of the seat, depending on the layout. So one thing that I do like to encourage clients to do is teach their dogs to learn how to use a ramp from being younger so that they actually don't need it only when they're older or there's a physical problem. Because if they're comfortable learning about it when they're younger, there's that lack of them doing something that they may injure themselves with. They're confident using the ramp. So, for example, if they do have a chronic problem later, they're happy to use a ramp already, not when they're already physically challenged and struggling. It's harder for them to learn because, again, it's that I don't feel that safe response. So they're not as confident using it. So whether it's a ramp or some steps or something like that, so that they have that option to get in and out of the car as part of that learning when they're younger, and also just help them be as physically fit as they can be. Because again, these cars can be so tall compared to the dogs.
Yeah, and that's very true. I've become very sensitive to this, so as I've been learning more. And our car is not particularly high, and Teddy does not travel in the boot, he travels on the back seat.
Yeah.
So so I'm happy for him to jump in because it's a soft landing and and we haven't got the issue of him having to stop because of, as you say, that we don't know about the layout. But what I have started to do is actually lift him out of the car because I can. He's not so big that I can't do that. Because
Yeah.
I suddenly started thinking about him jumping onto tarmac. Every time he gets out of the car, he's jumping onto tarmac, and again, that angle of the landing must be so hard, particularly on their front paws. So I've just started to do that. But yes, I think a ramp is an excellent idea, particularly for larger dogs. Yeah,
It is because you can't physically lift them. You know,
no,
some of them are so big. The other thing about them coming out of from the back seat is a lot of cars, the door doesn't open wide enough that they're not jumping out at an angle as well. So they've got to navigate from getting off the seat, clear the sill at an angle so that they avoid the door. And also, they've probably been lying there for a while, so their body's not warmed up. So again, it's that possibility of an injury there as well. And you know that there's always a possibility of an accident happening. One of our lurchers, and she was only a tiny little dot of a lurcher. She was all legs. She was the most divine girl ever. She was out on a walk in a field that we walked in hundreds and hundreds of times. She either put her foot down a slight hole or twisted it, and she fractured a hock, just on a walk. There was no other issues, so it wasn't that it was osteosarcoma, which is sometimes how people sadly find out that their dog has bone cancer, that the bone fractures. Um, I think she just put it down, possibly a hole, and the joint went totally the wrong way. And that needed some plates and pins putting in it. So there is always the possibility of an accident. I think what's always key is for people to look both around the home and the car and sort of where they walk for what might be an issue, because it's not about wrapping them in cotton wool because they need to enjoy their lives, but it's about how can we negate some of the possible issues that they may come across. And particularly with younger dogs, some dogs you can see hip dysplacia in dogs as young as 6 months. Now, you may not see a physical change, but you may see a behavioral change. So it's always interesting to observe what your dog's normal is and see what changes. So, for example, we've used the example of dogs jumping into cars. Lots of dogs are fit enough, they're healthy enough to do it, but then they start to just hesitate. They just take that moment or that just like kind of hesitation, they kind of go forwards, back a couple of times, and then they do it. If your dog starts doing that, it's worth getting them physically checked because it could be a physical problem that's creating that. And dogs are so good at hiding pain. It is something that they do regularly. There can be people whose dogs have had chronic problems for years, and it's just not clear because the dog just carries on. But sometimes in these little behavioral changes, you may just see that shift, and it's kind of, okay, is there something going on there? And it's always worth getting it checked, as I say, because dogs hide what's going on. So for some dogs, it's that their behavior changes and they get very much more out there and they're busier, or they grab the lead when they're out, or, their behavior changes in some way. But you also get the dog that goes inwards and quieter. So it's not always the busy, loud, barky, lungy dog. Sometimes it's those that goes quieter, goes in themselves, maybe stops sleeping in the same room as you. So if they've always stayed in the living room at night, for example, when everybody's settled, it might be that they go in another room. Some of these signs are so subtle that it's worth bearing in mind that it might be something going on. Even something simple like grooming, are they less comfortable with the grooming? Do they move away? Do they sit down when you go to the hindquarters? Do they look around at their hindquarters when you're brushing them, or try and grab the brush? There's all sorts of things that we can see that might give us an idea that there's something going on for our dogs.
It's
And sorry,
it's
go on.
for those little changes, isn't it? So yes, I think for me it would be if Teddy suddenly went, "Oh yes, can you please groom me?" I'd be thinking, That's not normal."
Oh
um,
dear, is he not a fan?
well, actually, he's fairly good if I am brushing him. It's the whole haircut business that he's not so thrilled about. But
Okay.
so these are the preventables. And, as we know, there are things that are not preventable because we can't predict them, like the time when Teddy ran almost at full speed into a tree whilst he was playing chase with a friend, and he rebounded, and we were very concerned because he looked in shock for a bit, and I had to carry him for a little bit, and
Oh,
and then he seemed to be normal after that. But I was watching him because this is the kind of thing that happens to us. We're walking along, not paying attention, and run into a lamppost or walk walk into a glass door. These are
yes.
things we can't really prevent. But what we're talking about here are things that are we can just be aware of, like hard floors and the fact that our dogs don't have traction on them, and it makes it difficult for them to move. You would laugh, but the only room in which we actually have a carpet is the kitchen. And you would laugh because it is the least likely room to have a carpet. There are
Yeah.
for that, but the reason it's there as well is because this is the room that Teddy likes to run around in and play
Ah,
chase around the kitchen table and grab games and play tug, etc. Now, if we had a laminate floor in there, that would not be the case. And
mm,
and we notice that when we go on holiday, um, there he doesn't have as much fun, and we know why. It's because he doesn't really want to run on that floor. So why is that?
yeah.
So it's this is the thing, is it's just about us being aware so that we prevent problems that are preventable. So one of the things that you talked about there, you were saying about, jumping out of the car, they're kind of, they're relaxed, they haven't, their muscles are not warmed up. So now that's making me think about our athletic dogs. And so how, if a dog loves doing agility or flyball, these very active sports, are there things that we can do to help them to warm up?
Yes. Um, and it's interesting that a human runner, typically would do some degree of warm up. Even if it's just sort of moving on the spot, they might do stretches, though you shouldn't do stretches with dogs just prior to a sport. Um, but the dogs might be, for example, if it's a competition, they may be in the vehicle for an hour or so before it's their turn, and then they've been still as well. So it might, if it's colder weather, they're in the cold, they've been still. And I'm reaching that age where if I've been still and cold and then try and move, I'm a bit creaky. It takes me a little bit to get going. And, giving them time, even just walking them for a few minutes on the lead, just giving them that time to walk, then trot, maybe do a few little S bends, so get them moving like that. So there's that little bit of flexion in the body. Just getting them to use the body in a way that they can warm up before they actually, either in competition or at practice, etc., is more beneficial for them. And the same with a typical injury for racing greyhounds, because I do love my sight hounds, we've had them 30 years, is there is a muscle on the inside of the hind leg called the gracilis muscle. and it's one that is frequently damaged by dogs as they come out of the traps because of that massive, massive impulse. And they make such a mess of the muscle. They really do. And that again is that they've gone from still to that real burst of speed. So it's actually about maybe even if they're going to a secure field, have them walk for a few minutes on the lead rather than just get them out of the car, open the door and they vroom, shoot off. Again, then that would be hopefully more beneficial for them because the same as us, muscles get a little bit stiff. If we warm them up a little bit, then they move more freely. The muscles are responsible for the joints. So if we're asking our dogs to do something that requires movement through the joints, the muscles and all the connective tissue has to be movable. And it's more comfortable for them. It's more beneficial for them physically. Even do a little bit of proprioceptive work, get them working over poles just flat on the ground, surfaces, get them using the body in a calm way so that they're not just really giddy and bounding around. Because we know our dogs get excited, they love doing some of the things that we do with them. So just ensuring that they are comfortable and that they are warmed up before they do anything. So that's something I do with mine if we're going to the secure field. Just have them on lead for a few minutes to start off with, get them out so they walk rather than just shoot off. Because again, it's just being that little bit more sensible, just thinking things through. And hopefully, if people are doing a sport, then they'd be a member of a club, and the club would encourage them to do that a little bit more as well. So it's just about that encouraging them to move and be sort of free moving so that they are less likely to injure themselves. Because it's the same as us, it's that, are we ready for what we're doing? Maybe, maybe not. We maybe need to do a little bit more of a warm up.
That's interesting because I was thinking about how so many of our dogs, when they're younger, particularly, we take them for a walk, in fields and woodland, and they are in hyper excitement because this walk, this is the best bit of the day. And you see them where the lead comes off and immediately they go into running, but they've been in the car. And it's just made me think how it probably would be good for us to keep them on the lead for about, the first 5 minutes
Yeah.
before letting them off. Now, I used to do that because, not for that reason, but because I wanted Teddy to show me he was going to be sensible before I dared to let the lead take the lead in that first year. Actually, no, Teddy was on a long lead for a very long time. But because he was such a hyper aroused dog when we were out walking, and it wasn't because of lack of stimulation. He had lots of happy stimulation at home. He just adored those walks and got very excited. But but I did used to, for my sanity, wait for him to calm down a bit and then let him off, and then he'd play with his friends and he'd be fine. But
Yeah.
looking back, I'm thinking actually that was a really good thing for other reasons too. And
Yeah.
least of which, if he was with friends, their play was always super exuberant.
Mm.
Games of chase, wrestling, all of that kind of thing that went on when they're, before the age of 3. After 3, they seem to slow down a little bit, although they still play. But it's in those first 3 years when they were absolutely hyper excited, where they played throughout the walk. So it was like an hour of straight play
Yeah.
with bits of rest in between. And I just realized, gosh, I feel quite lucky that Teddy made me do that.
What's interesting about walks is it's easy for them to get overstimulated just because there's so much going on. It's what's that smell? What can I see over there? What's that noise? Oh, there's somebody coming towards me. So, particularly when they're younger, even if they do have stimulation at home, it's that change in the environment. And those changes are sort of physiological as well. So that overstimulation creates that lack of awareness of what they're doing. It's that I'm just going to keep going, and they don't have that off switch so much. And that can be even more so if you've got, for example, a group of younger dogs, because they struggle to self-regulate as well. Whereas if you have maybe a younger dog with an older dog, then they may have a better balance as to how much they're doing. There's no one answer because everybody's home situation's different. Each dog's an individual. Our routines can be different to each other. But it's about finding what works well, safely for them and for us. Because if they feel safe physically, then they feel safer emotionally as well, because they're linked. You can't separate them.
No, it's
And
the same
you
for
know,
it.
it's just when you think it through, it's kind of common sense. But that's something we say a lot in T-Touch, the behavior, the physical, the emotional, they're all linked. They are in us. Think about the days, for example, if I've not slept very well, I'm not particularly a ray of sunshine the next day. A little bit lower energy, not as tolerant. I maybe get frustrated with myself more if I can't do something. And we kind of expect our dogs to be the same day in and day out. We don't expect that of any other species. And we certainly don't necessarily expect it of ourselves. But our dogs, we tend to kind of think, well, they're going to be the same. If they've got a chronic issue, that's going to vary. If they're a senior dog, it's going to vary. We've got certain life stages where that is more likely to vary. But even day to day, if they've had a really busy day, and it can be good busy and they've been happy, but it's tiring. And if they don't then sleep, or they're overstimulated and they can't sleep, that's going to have a knock-on effect for maybe 3, 4 days, particularly if their adrenaline levels have got really high, and they may struggle to sleep a little bit more. They may be out of kilter with their routine. They may just find everything else a little bit more difficult.
Well, they do get tired. I mean, I remember, you know, even in Teddy's first 3 years, and we used to have once a week, at least, there was a day where everybody would meet, all his friends would meet at somebody's house, and we would kind of just rotate where we'd meet. And you know, they would have an absolute blast playing in the garden with each other, and we'd sit around, talking, having lunch. It was always really good fun for everybody. But the next day, or if there was a party or something, the next day Teddy would always just want a quiet day. He still wanted to go for his walks, yes, but he appreciated it just being him. So, just having that sense of, oh, today is a day for relaxing because yesterday was very, very busy. Coming back to sports though, and I was just thinking, even in classes like agility classes, etc., they do have long gaps between activities. So, in an agility class, for instance, you, every dog has to have their turn before they go again. And certainly in competitions, this is also the case. So they are going from, again, it's that rest to action. And it's made me think about what you've said about the warming up. It's very important, isn't it? I had not thought of that.
It is, and if even if they don't have an acute problem, so they go over, for example, if we use agility as an example, they go over a jump, they land badly as they turn, and they have an injury to their wrist, their carpus, for example, that's acute, needs a vet visit. There is always the possibility of micro tears within the muscle. So a tiny little tear, not every time, but these tiny little tears start to build up. And, we know in humans we get repetitive strain injuries. It's those kind of movements that we want to avoid that being an issue. And the other thing for dogs who do sports is to make sure that they are fit enough to do the sport so that they are a good weight, because additional weight is interesting in that we tend to think it's just the additional weight that is a problem to the joints. But actually, fat cells are also inflammation cells. So it's adding more inflammation into the body. Arthritis is an inflammatory disease. So we want to keep our dogs with a good body condition. So not too thin, because if they're too thin, they've no reserves if they are ill, but not too heavy. And it is a big problem in dogs in the UK now that a lot of them are carry excessive weight. And it's also about managing, if they're in an active time, are they being fed enough? If they're going into a quiet time, do we actually need to think about cutting food back so that in that time they're not putting that weight on? So weight is important as part of that for any dog of any age. But also, if we're thinking about our sporting dogs, we don't want them overweight, but we need them to be physically fit enough to do it. Because what we don't want are those grumbling injuries that just kind of intermittently show up, then they go, and it doesn't quite get to the bottom of it, because you are adding, probably, because each dog's different and the injury may be different, you may have a chronic issue there, but then you've got an acute issue on top of that as well. So you end up with two issues that you are dealing with at the same time.
I lost you for about 20 seconds, but
Okay.
I suspect it's okay. Taking you back to repetitive injury, um, what are the kind of everyday activities that dogs might do that we don't think about as being a potential for repetitive injury, repetitive strain injury, sorry.
Yeah, one of the big things are the ball chuckers. So a ball chucker throws a ball very high, very far, and you will get dogs who run very, very quickly towards the ball. And then you get those dogs who jump in the air and twist, and they will typically get into a pattern of how they will move. It will become quite habitual. Or they absolutely slam the brakes on because the ball is on the floor and they want to get it. These kind of injuries are not the kind of normal movement patterns that a dog would make. So they are additional strain type injuries that can happen with our dogs because we think that they need to be active. So, oh, I've got a working breed, it needs a lot of physical activity. It does need physical activity. It also needs mental activity. And actually finding a balance between the two, because the other thing about that is if we always do the same thing, so for example, go to the park, stand in the middle of the field, throw the ball however many times, this is building up that excitement within the dog and can sometimes lead to too much adrenaline, cortisol in the body. And if they've got adrenaline and cortisol in the body, they may not be aware that they're sore because it masks it. They can get an acute injury from it, or again, you may get that repetitive, always turning in a certain way, that you may get injuries there. And we know that this happens. It's something that we've probably always done with our dogs, so we don't think about the pros and cons of it because we've always done it. But because we've always done something doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. So when we know better, we can do better, and this is really what we need to think about, because it's that excitement level as well. Doing calming things, take them to the park, lay a trail for them, a scent trail for them to find. If there's two of you, play hide and seek. There's all sorts of things that you can do to combine the physical and the mental, or have them as different things. But it's as important, a study I read a long, long time ago said that 10 minutes mental activity is equivalent to about a half-hour walk because of the tiredness, but also it's a calming activity rather than an overexciting activity. And sometimes if we're doing overexciting activities, the dogs then find it hard to stop. It's like if you think about toddlers, a room full of toddlers or young children, they're really excited to start with, and then at some point it starts going wrong because they haven't got that ability at that age to just kind of go, right, I need to go and settle down, I need to sleep or something. The same for our dogs. We need to be aware of what's good for them and what maybe is not so good for them. And it's not necessarily the best thing to be having those ball chuckers in the middle of the field, because it does create that repetitive movement throughout the dog. And if they're going on 2 walks a day, that's 14 of that activity, 14 repetitions in a week. That's nearly that's 56 times in a month. When you start to build that up, the chances are they probably do have a pattern, so they may always jump up to the left or the right, or they may turn in one direction if the ball's on the floor. So it is putting more strain on one part of the body than the other.
I think the thing is, they are so athletic that we take it for granted that this is how they are and this is how they will always be. And we forget because we marvel at the antics and what they're capable of physically. We marvel at what they're capable of. And we forget that however extraordinary those movements are for us, that they too have limits, and that they too can be prone to injury, and repetitive strain being one of them.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's good to have these conversations, is because it reminds us that yes, they are awesome. They are absolutely amazing from the human perspective. To be able to and twist and catch a ball in that way is just almost, it's joyous to see.
Yeah.
But we need to remember that too much of that is not so good for them. And as you pointed out, there is a psychological aspect here too. And I always feel that a variety of games keeps them more focused on us. If we've got a dog that, particularly with younger dogs, where their recall might not be quite 100%, to play games that keep them engaged with us, I think is a good thing. And to have a variety of games is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, just brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your time today. There's so much to think about. If people want to find you, how do they do that?
So they can find me online. and my website, which is wellbalancedanimals-vetphysio.co.uk. Or I have my Facebook page, which is Well Balanced Animals, and they can find my other contact details on there, my email and my phone number on both of them. So if anybody would like a chat, there's that option on my calendar as well, so I can give them a few tips and see what would be best for their dog.
Fabulous. I'll be putting a link to all of it in the description box. Thank you so much again for your time today.
Thank you to you and to Teddy as well.
Who is now asleep, as you may have heard him dreaming not very long ago.
No, I didn't actually.
His sleep there.
Oh.
So he went back to sleep. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. A reminder that in the description box, you will also find a link to my Substack, in which you will find very occasionally the wonderful adventures of Teddy and Mummy. Until then, until next time, goodbye.
Bye.